My name is Nia Potter and I am an Employment Advisor for BMA Cymru Wales. The purpose of this presentation is to give you an idea of the terms and conditions of your employment when you start working as an F1 in August. This presentation will cover the terms and conditions of service for F1 doctors working in the 4 nations of the United Kingdom. I'll show you some of the details of your contract and explain how the BMA can support you as you join the medical workforce. I'll aim to cover as much information as possible throughout this talk, but if you do have any questions, please either visit the BMA website or email our team or advisors who will be happy to help you. I will provide my email address at the end of the presentation. The BMA is the Doctors' Trade Union and Professional Association. We are the voice of the medical professional, representing all doctors and medical students locally and nationally on the issues that affect you and supporting you throughout your careers. We are here if you experience any difficulties at work or want to build on your professional development. We are not an indemnity insurer and we do not deal with patient complaints, so we recommend that you seek this cover in addition. You may be aware that there are 2 sets of terms and conditions of service for junior doctors in the UK. The terms and conditions of service, which is often abbreviated to just TCS, that apply in Wales, Scotland and Northern Ireland were introduced in 2002 and is known as the New Deal. The TCS remain broadly the same in the 3 devolved nations, but there are minor differences which I will draw to your attention. The terms and conditions in England were introduced in 2016, with additions made in both 2018 and 2019. In order to avoid trainees having to go through the same pre-employment checks every time they move hospital or employers, there has been a gradual introduction of single lead employers for hospital-based trainees and in some instances GP trainees. In Wales, the single lead employer model for GP trainees was introduced some years ago, and for hospital-based trainees, it was introduced since September 2020. The single lead employer in Wales is the NHS Shared Services Partnership. There are 4 lead employers in Scotland: NHS Lothian, NHS Greater Glasgow and Clyde, NHS Grampian, and NHS Education for Scotland. In Northern Ireland, with a few exceptions, all trainees are employed by the Northern Ireland Medical and Dental Training Agency. There are several lead employers in England, and if you are moving there, I would suggest that you contact your educational provider for more information. If you move between nations or education providers during the course of your training, your lead employer will change. Now to your contractual rights. Firstly, let's look at salary. On the left-hand side are the current salaries for an F1 doctor under the 2002 terms. On the right-hand side is the English contract. Under the 2002 contract, you usually start at the minimum point of the pay scale and progress through the pay structure with every year of service. There are slight differences between the F1 salaries of the 3 nations of the 2002 contract, as you can see. The pay scale under the English contract is comprised of 5 nodal points linked to the stage of training the junior doctor has reached. You may also be entitled to London weighting if your hospital is within a specified area. There are 2 zones, a London zone and a fringe zone, and different rates applied to each. These salaries are based on you working a basic 40-hour working week. However, in reality, junior doctors' average weekly working hours are usually greater than this due to the out-of-hours commitment, namely working evenings, nights and weekends. The average weekly working hours should not be greater than 48 hours due to the provisions of working time regulations, which prohibits working in excess of 48 hours per week on average, unless that individual has opted out of the regulations by signing an opt-out form. If you are planning on working less than full-time, under the 2016 contract, pay is pro rata, but you will also get an allowance as well. Under the 2002 terms, your salary will be dependent on the total number of hours a full-timer works and the proportion of that the less than full-time trainee works. Under both terms and conditions of service, only your basic pay is pensionable. This graph gives a visual representation of the comparison between the two pay structures, principally with respect to the Wales 2002 contract. You can see that the English basic salary is front-loaded compared to the 2002 terms, but that the 2002 basic salary increases every year, whereas the 2016 contract does not. Any additional hours worked over the basic hours of 40 per week are also paid differently under the two contracts. In England, you are paid at the basic rate of 1/40th of your weekly whole-time equivalent salary for each hour over the 40 hours up to a maximum of 8 additional hours. Under the 2002 terms, any additional hours over the 40 hours per week is reflected in a banding supplement, which I will detail later in the presentation. Under the 2002 terms, any nighttime work between the hours of 7 p.m. to 7 a.m. is classed as premium time and is recognised and paid by the banding supplement. In England, a 37% enhancement is paid on hours worked between 9 p.m. and 7 a.m. But this enhancement can be paid outside these hours in certain circumstances, as described here. Any work completed at the weekend under the 2002 terms will be classed as premium time and paid via the banding supplement. The English contract provides for an allowance to be paid if you are rostered to work on a weekend. The amount of this allowance is a percentage of basic salary based on the frequency of weekends across the length of the rota cycle. F1s usually work a full shift rota, which is usually a combination of normal working days, late shifts and night shifts, and requires for you to be on site and working throughout the shift. As you progress with your training, however, you may be asked to work a non-resident on-call or NROC working pattern. Non-resident on-call is not a full shift and is where your employer requires you to be available to return to work or to give advice by phone, but you are not expected to be working on-site for the whole period. Under the 2002 terms, if you are given an NROC shift, this will be accounted for in your banding. In England, you will be paid an on-call availability allowance. So in summary, your total salary will be made up of different components. Under the 2002 terms, your total salary will be made up of the basic pay and banding supplement. In England, the number of hours in the rota for which an enhancement is paid will be assessed across the length of the rota cycle and converted into equal weekly amounts by dividing the total number of hours to be paid at each rate by the number of weeks in the rota cycle. The weekly amount will then be turned into an annual figure, and the doctor will be paid 1/12 of the annual figure for each complete month, or a proportion thereof for any partial months worked. Average total hours and average hours that attract an enhancement will be assessed in quarter hours, rounded up to the nearest quarter hour. The banding system aims to remunerate junior doctors on the 2002 terms fairly, according to the actual hours worked and the frequency of their out-of-hours work. Every full-time junior doctor on the 2002 terms and conditions will be working on a rota that falls into one of these pay bands or will be unbanded. You will be notified of your banding once you start employment, and this can change throughout your training as you move between rotations. Under the 2016 contract, there are also annual pay supplements of varying amounts that are awarded to certain types of trainee. This can be for various reasons, for example, to address current recruitment shortages in particular specialties by making the specialty more financially attractive, or to address a pay disparity between one specialty and others. So you can see, the total pay you will be paid is going to be dependent on your working pattern. In Wales, Scotland or Northern Ireland, if the rota fulfills the criteria of a specific banding, then it is straightforward to calculate your total pay. In England, there are several different elements to take into consideration, so determining your total salary will not be as straightforward. You will be issued with your own work schedule. This is an example of a rota in Wales. It includes on-call duties, which F1s do not usually do, but this gives an idea of what a rota would look like. It's based on a 5-week cycle, which means there are only 5 doctors on the rota. This would usually be a fairly intense rota. There is a high frequency of out-of-hours work, and so this rota is likely to be a band 1A, attracting a 50% supplement, or a band 2A, attracting an 80% supplement. Within your F1 year, you will have 3 placements or rotations, each one with a different rota and out-of-hours commitment, so your total salary is going to fluctuate from rota to rota. Under the 2002 terms, all you need to ask to determine total salary is what banding does the rota attract. Under the 2016 terms, you need to ask the following questions, which you can only do when you get the rota. Will I work more than 40 hours of rostered hours per week on average? Will I work weekends? Will I work nights? And will I work a non-resident on-call rota? If you are working in England, once you are issued with your own work schedule, the BMA has a rota checker on its website that only applies to the 2016 contract, and that will assist in determining the additional payments that your specific rota will attract. For those of you on the 2002 terms, the BMA has a banding flowchart to assist in determining whether your rota attracts the correct banding for your working pattern. There are 2 instruments that govern your hours of work: your contract, either the 2002 terms or the 2016 terms, and the working time regulations. As they both apply simultaneously, there is sometimes an overlap between the 2, but whatever is the most beneficial to you will apply. Most F1s will start working on a full shift rota, and the limits and rest requirements under the 2002 terms are shown here. The 2002 contract provides for a break of 30 minutes after 4 hours of working. The 2016 contract provides for at least one 30-minute break for a shift lasting more than 5 hours, and a second 30-minute break if the shift is more than 9 hours. Night shifts of 12 hours or more get a third 30-minute break. The requirements under both contracts are lengthy and complex. Therefore, please go to the BMA website if you'd like to read these in detail. These provisions are also complemented and reinforced by a BMA Facilities and Fatigue Charter. The last slide mentions the working time regulations. The EWTD, European Working Time Directive, is an EU initiative to prevent employers from requiring their workforce to work excessively long hours with implications for health and safety. The UK version of the EWTD is also known as the WTR, Working Time Regulations. Some of the rest requirements in the 2002 or the 2016 contracts are better than the rest requirements in the EWTD that are shown here. However, as already mentioned, the requirement that is most beneficial will apply. It is not possible for an employer to opt out of rest requirements, so doctors should still ensure that they take the necessary breaks and that their employer needs to monitor the hours they work. However, it is possible to opt out of the other provisions, so it is possible for doctors to work longer hours than the maximum 48 hours per week on average by signing an opt-out clause. The BMA's Junior Doctors Committee believes this option should be retained only for those doctors who are able to determine their working hours. Where someone has signed an opt-out, they may agree with their employer to work in excess of 48 hours per week on average. If you do opt out, make sure your time is appropriately recognised and paid. There is no nationally agreed system for junior doctors to opt out of the hours limits of the EWTD. However, your employer should not present you with an opt-out as a requirement of employment or a requirement of your training or specific placement. An opt-out should not be placed within your contract either. However, if you are provided with an opt-out form with your contract, you are not obliged to complete it, as the EWTD is health and safety legislation and represents legal protection for you. If you have any further questions about opting out of EWTD, please look at the BMA website or contact our advisors. What do you do if you believe that you are working excess hours to that of the EWTD or your rota? Under the 2002 terms, routine monitoring by the employer should take place every 6 months. However, if you feel that your rota is not banded correctly, you are working excess hours, or you are not getting your breaks or rest, you can request monitoring outside of this period. Such a request must be done in writing. You are contractually obliged to participate in monitoring if requested to do so by your employer. The results will be looked at over the entire rota and not on an individual basis, and you are able to appeal if you do not agree with the monitoring outcome. If the monitoring exercise shows a higher banding should be payable, this will be paid and in some circumstances backdated. Under the 2016 contract, your work pattern is individual. So in the event of excess hours or not getting breaks, you make the employer aware under an exception reporting system. There is also an appointed guardian of safe working. The exception reporting system is also to record missed training opportunities. The guardian of safe working is an independent senior appointment responsible for overseeing a safe working pattern. If excessive hours and lack of breaks are identified during a monitoring exercise under the 2002 terms, the contract provides for a payment of 100% of your basic salary, a band 3. Under the English contract, the guardian for safe working can levy a fine if the hours breach safe working limits, and the money is split between the juniors directly and the employer to be put towards benefits for the junior doctors. Under the 2002 contract, as an F1, you are entitled to 5 weeks annual leave. You are also entitled to 8 bank holidays and an additional 2 days known as statutory days, which are either specified or converted into annual leave. In Wales and Northern Ireland, you may find that leave is fixed in advance into your rota, and so you may have to swap leave with your colleagues. In Scotland, fixed leave is the exception. If an employer still uses it, the trainees must be notified 6 weeks in advance and can still request a swap if they are on a rota with fixed leave. Under the 2016 terms, leave is outlined in days, and you are entitled to 27 days as an F1 plus 8 bank holidays. Fixed leave is not permitted under the 2016 terms unless expressly agreed. Also, an employer must grant leave when it's been requested for a life-changing event, such as getting married. For both the 2002 and 2016 terms, leave must be applied for with a minimum of 6 weeks' notice. If you are rostered to work a bank holiday, you must be given a day back in lieu, which you can take like normal annual leave. If you are unable to take all your leave by the end of the year through no fault of your own due to service need, it should be paid in lieu or carried over to your next post if that's possible. However, if you find yourself in this position, ensure that you raise it as an issue before you leave. F1s are limited in the locums they can do, as they do not have full GMC registration. Under the 2002 terms, junior doctors are able to pick up locum shifts up to 48 hours per week on average, or 56 hours per week on average, if you have opted out of the limit under EWTD. Under the 2016 terms, junior doctors must first offer any spare hours to the NHS via their staff bank. If you do choose to do locum work at any time, ensure that you agree the rates payable in advance and in writing. Employers are legally required to provide your written statement of terms and conditions, in other words your contract, no later than your first day in post. However, it is common and best practice for it to be sent to you beforehand. Payday in Wales and England is usually around the 20th of the month or thereabouts, but you are paid for the whole of the month. In Scotland, trainees are paid on the last Thursday of every month, except in December, when payroll runs around a week earlier. In Northern Ireland, payday is on the third last banking day of the month. Payslips are provided electronically, and I would strongly recommend that you try to download them and save to your own records for your future reference. Foundation Year 1 doctors all start in their new roles on the first Wednesday in August. If you are working in Wales, Northern Ireland and Scotland, you will have a 4-day shadowing or induction period immediately before starting your post, which is paid. However, this 4-day period is paid at basic salary rate only. The banding is not payable for this period. In England, payment for an induction or shadowing period is discretionary and depends on your employer. It is worth noting that F1 accommodation in Wales is free. However, it is classed by HM Revenue and Customs as a taxable benefit, so you may get a tax bill or adjustment in the following financial year. Under the 2002 terms, F1s are entitled to reasonable time for study. Under the 2016 terms, F1s are eligible for 15 days per annum, but under both TCS, study leave will consist of regular teaching and training sessions as agreed locally. Wherever you undertake your foundation programme, your deanery or education provider is likely to have its own study leave policy. I would therefore recommend that you obtain a copy of your relevant policy so you can see what study funding, if any, you are eligible to receive. Similarly, wherever you undertake your foundation programme, your deanery or education provider is likely to have its own travelling and relocation expenses policy, so you may be eligible to claim for expenses if you have to move to take up your post or rotation. Again, I would recommend that you obtain a copy of the relevant policy to familiarise yourself with the entitlements in that regard. Sick pay. NHS contractual sick pay provisions are generous and depend on length of service. Initially, however, if you have been working for between 4 and 12 months, contractual sick pay is 1 month's full pay followed by 2 months half pay. If you are still unable to work after this period, your income from the NHS will be based on statutory sick pay and then nil. You will join the NHS pension scheme automatically on starting work. As previously advised, only basic pay is pensionable and pension contributions are subject to tax relief. The pension contributions vary based on the total pensionable pay, but for an F1, your employee contribution will either be 7.1% of pensionable pay or 9.3%, depending on how much you earn. Also remember that as an employee, you will be able to claim tax relief from your BMA membership subscription as well as other work-related expenses. I would advise that you obtain financial advice on pension and taxation matters. All the contractual documentation that I've described in this presentation, including specific resources, are available on the BMA website for members. Now I am going to briefly talk about what the BMA can do for you and why you should be a member. I have mentioned many resources which are available for members on the website, so if you are not a member, it really is worth joining to have use of these. My colleagues and I, as employment advisors, offer individual employment advice for members on any training or work-related issues, including a contract checking service. Please send us your contract for checking to ensure that you are on the nationally agreed terms and conditions of service and in receipt of all the contractual rights to which you are entitled. As a member, you also have access to BMA Learning, which offers evidence-based interactive learning modules, which are often recommended by educational supervisors. You will also have access to the BMA Library and the BMJ. I mentioned earlier that you are able to claim tax relief from your BMA subscription, as well as other work-related costs, such as the GMC or Royal College. There is a form on the website you can use for this. These are exceptional times for the health service, and as new doctors, you may find yourselves experiencing additional pressures, stress, or anxiety as you enter the workforce. If at any time you need support, or you would like to speak to someone in confidence, please know that we are here for you. Our BMA Wellbeing Support Services are open 24/7 to all doctors and medical students. You do not need to be a BMA member. You will have the choice of speaking to a counsellor or another doctor who you can contact for peer support. Visit bma.org.uk for details or call 0330 123 1245. The services are confidential and free of charge. Thank you very much for listening. If you have any queries, please either contact myself, visit the BMA website, or email any of our team of advisors on support@bma.org.uk, and we will be happy to help you.